The Formula One has experienced many unusual situations in its history. One of them occurred at the traditional Monaco Grand Prix in its 1982 edition. In the last 3 laps, one driver after another retired after taking the lead. In an increasingly shorter grid, those who managed to stay on the track emerged victorious. This was the most chaotic end to a Grand Prix ever, which became known as the race that no one wanted to win, the 1982 Monaco Grand Prix. The Monaco Grand Prix was surrounded by an odd atmosphere that year. The race was held 2 weeks after the loss of Gilles Villeneuve at the Belgian GP held at Zolder, and the mood in the paddock was somber. For the race, Ferrari lined up only Didier Pironi's car number 28, leaving the Canadian driver's seat empty. With about a third of the championship contested, Alain Prost led the competition with 18 points, followed by John Watson 1 point behind. Keke Rosberg was third with 14 and Niki Lauda followed with 12. In fifth were tied Michele Alboreto and Pironi, both with 10. In the Constructors' Championship, McLaren led with 29, followed by Renault with 22, Williams with 20, and Ferrari with 16. Tyrrell appeared fifth, 6 points behind, with 10. 3 teams arrived in Monte Carlo without a tire supplier. Avon was withdrawing from competition after the political dispute seen at the San Marino GP, leaving March, Theodore, and Ensign in the lurch. At Brabham, the team was still refining the BT50 model to run with BMW engines, and Piquet was chosen to race with the turbo engines. Patrese was left to race with the BD49B equipped with the old Ford Cosworth DFV. In the pre-qualifying session, Jean-Pierre Jarier, Jochen Mass, and Derek Warwick secured their spots, while Teo Fabi, Riccardo Paletti, Raul Boesel, Chico Serra, and Emilio De Villota failed to qualify. At the end of the session, a curious situation arose. During weighing, some members of other teams noticed that the car sent as masses was different from the one used in the time trial. The team would have swapped cars, giving the driver a lighter car for the quick lap and a heavier car for the last laps in weighing. According to team boss John McDonald, this was done because of a gearbox failure, which spread pieces around the paddock and forced the mechanics to dismantle the equipment. Despite complaints from rivals, Mass's time was kept in the classification. In qualifying, almost all drivers set their best times on Saturday. René Arnoux took pole position with a time of 1 minute, 23 seconds, and 281 thousandths. Brabham's Riccardo Patrese appeared in second place, 5/10 thousandths behind, and Bruno Giacomelli closed the top 3 with 1 minute, 23 seconds, and 939 thousandths. The top 10 were completed by Prost, Pironi, Keke Rosberg, Andrea De Cesaris, Derek Daly, Michele Alboreto, and Watson from McLaren. Ensign's Roberto Guerrero and Theodore's Jan Lammers were still without tires after Avon's exit, but in the end, they managed to do a few laps with old tires and others provided by other brands. Neither they nor Mass, who raced with Goodyear tires on his march, managed to qualify. Arrow's Mark Surer qualified in 19th, but during weighing, the marshals found a piece of lead weighing just over 5 kilos loose inside the cockpit. As it was not a part of the car and was not attached to the body of the model, the team was fined £300 and was allowed to race. The race, held on May 23, 1982, had 76 scheduled laps and had a dry track and sunshine, with a chance of rain during the race. At the start, Arnoux stayed in the lead and quickly began to open a gap against the rest of the pack. His teammate Prost also progressed through the grid, already occupying third place. At the end of the first lap, Arnoux led, followed by Giacomelli, Prost, Patrese, Pironi, De Cesaris, Alboreto, and Rosberg. Giacomelli held the pack, and 2 laps later, Prost managed to overtake after a transmission failure from Alfa Romeo. On lap 7, Arnoux, who already had a 7-second lead and was setting a strong pace, lost control at the swimming pool chicane and spun, retiring afterwards. Prost took the lead and stayed there for much of the race, making the race seem monotonous. On lap 23, Eliseo Salazar had to retire due to a breakdown. As he prepared to exit the cockpit, the internal fire extinguisher of the ATS activated on its own, involving the driver in a cloud of smoke. As time went on, the leaders began to lap the rest of the field, and on lap 32, Prost reached De Angelis. The Lotus driver blocked the Frenchman for much of the lap, giving time for Patrese and Pironi to approach. The first 2 managed to pass the Lotus and continued their races, but Pironi ended up touching De Angelis. The incident broke the nose of the Ferrari, which remained in the race without the front cone. Piquet was the next backmarker, and the Brazilian also blocked Prost, this time for 3 laps. Meanwhile, in the middle of the pack, other dramas unfolded. Lauda seemed to be performing poorly, and 2 cars ahead, Mansell was leaking oil with the other Lotus. Between them were Daly and Watson, but both had a lukewarm race. Cheever retired on lap 27 with another oil leak, Jacques Lafitte stopped 2 laps later with handling issues, and Winkelhock retired with the other ATS due to a transmission failure. Up front, Watson retired with engine problems, paving the way for the others while clouds darkened the sky. Mansell made a pit stop and gave way to Piquet, but the Brazilian needed to retire with a turbo issue. The next victim was Lauda, who also had problems and retired. Prost was opening up a gap against Patrace's Brabham until 15 laps from the end when rain finally arrived. At that moment, the dilemma began. With few laps remaining, no one wanted to make pit stops, even if it meant having more difficulty in keeping the car on the track. Rosberg was the first victim, crashing 11 laps from the end, while Michele Alboreto of Tyrrell retired with suspension problems. De Angelis, who at a certain point was being lapped by the leader, now chased Derek Daly of Williams, who was without the rear wing after spinning and crashing. As if the rain wasn't enough, Daly's car also leaked oil onto the track, turning the asphalt into a real soap. With 3 laps to go and only 8 cars on the track, chaos decided to take over completely. Prost lost control of his Renault at the exit of the chicane and hit the barriers head-on. The race lead passed to Patrese, but it didn't last long. The Italian spun at the Lowe's hairpin after hitting the oil left on the track by Daly. Due to the incident, Patrace's Brabham was stuck, at least at that moment, right there. The next victim of the confusion was Pironi. On the last lap, the Frenchman, who was being cautious with the track conditions, entered the tunnel and didn't come out. Out of fuel, the Ferrari parked, and he also couldn't finish. Another one who stopped without fuel was De Cesaris, who parked his Alfa Romeo and missed the chance. Daly, who was holding onto the track without the rear wing, inherited the lead but also had to stop, this time at the exit of the swimming pool. The spin that damaged his wing also damaged the gearbox, which broke for good. With so many cars stopping, both the marshals and the race director no longer knew exactly who was in the lead, which at that moment had fallen into Patrace's lap. The driver managed to return to the race, but no one was passing the finish line. At the time, there was no fast communication line like today, and this caused both the marshals and the audience to be lost about the classification and who had remained. Suddenly, everyone heard a loud engine sound approaching the main straight. Carefully, Patrese crossed the finish line first without knowing he had won the race and got out of the car believing he had finished second. As there were also no radios in the cars of the time, no warning that he was the winner had come. Patrese only realized he had won when an engineer came to hug him as he got out of his cockpit. The rest of the podium was as strange as the final laps. Pironi was considered the second-place finisher, and De Cesaris finished third, even without completing the final laps. De Angelis and Mansell managed to complete all the laps and cross the finish line after Patrese, but there was a problem. Both Pironi and De Cesaris managed to lap the 2 drivers, actually making them the 4th and 5th place finishers. Thus, Pironi and De Cesaris finished the race ahead of the 2, even without completing the final lap. With all the mess sorted out, Mansell finished 4th and De Angelis 5th. Completing the top 10 were Daly, Prost, Brian Henton, Surer, and Alboreto. With the victory, Patrese presented himself for the title fight with 13 points and left Monaco in 5th place, behind Rosberg, Pironi, Watson, and Prost. If you enjoyed the video and want more information about Formula 1, IndyCar, and others, subscribe to the channel. Questions, suggestions, or tips are always welcome. Leave them in the comments below. Until next time.